We have next to no birthdays this week. We have Keith Atkinson and Ruben Duran, and that's it. So, happy birthday to them, and I hope they eat loads of cake. Now, whilst I was also on YouTube, I noticed several other things that I thought perhaps, as this blog is a little bit lacking, I could just give some snap thoughts about. The first one is sort of a local issue, and this is the issues that are going on with Greece. Do you know, I want to make it quite clear that I believe that you should live within your means. However, I do also note that part of Greece's problems have been created by being in the euro, and that they aren't always able to sort of regulate their own money. That is part of the problem. That is part of the problem why they are in debt. And that's one of the dangers of being in a single currency if you aren't in a political unity, because you're each trying to sort of make sure that you are competitive. Well, how can you do that when there's, you know, only one currency with sort of one sort of level of maintenance and stuff like that? I do think he's being a little bit clever here. He has said that he is going to put the bailout extension conditions to a snap referendum. The result of that will be that the Greek people decide what happens. Inevitably, they are not going to go for more austerity, otherwise they wouldn't have elected him in the first place, because he is against austerity. And that's interesting because it also means that whatever happens, he's wiped his hands of the responsibility by basically putting it to a vote. It also means that he won't lose the support of his people no matter what happens, because he's given them that option. Finally, it does raise an interesting question with Europe, one that has been raised many times before, but that is the fact that as a Eurozone, and as a union, it has very little respect for individual sovereignties within that. You know, the thought that England might dare to have a referendum and vote to leave the union. I mean, how dare they? Because obviously the union is fantastic and some sort of, you know, utopia. It's an institution, and it's an institution above the democratic rights of individual sort of sovereignties. And by doing this, he is forcing the lenders, who, in all honesty, deserve to have their money back, don't they? If you lend to somebody, you do expect to have the money back. That's the whole point of it. So you can sort of say that they have a right to be a little bit annoyed by the fact that they keep emptying money into this black hole, and Greece has no real intention to pay it back. So you can imagine that they are upset and annoyed by that, but it paints the picture that they don't care about the individual, Greek person on the street, and that the horribleness that may befall him because of what his government has to do in order to sort of stay afloat. All of this goes back to my original premise that you shouldn't live beyond your means. That just goes as a sort of baseline with me. However, Greece and the EU are way, way beyond that. And so I do think he's being very, very clever in the way he's tackling this. I don't necessarily agree with him, but he is certainly a politician for absolute certainty. Now, the other thing that I want to show people, which is I find a little bit annoying, is the idea that the US High Supreme Court, or whatever it is, has recently done a ruling on gay marriage. It was bound to happen eventually, because it's been going on. It's been going on across Europe and stuff for quite some time now. You know, I want to make it quite clear that I believe that people should have the choice to do what they want within sort of the zeitgeist of the time, and the zeitgeist of the time has basically accepted homosexuality. It's no longer, in most Western situations, a cause for, chopping one's head off or, killing them on the basis of religious rules. And indeed, since the New Testament, the same has similarly been accepted sort of by Christians. People have a right to choose. They have a right to do what is right, and they also have a right to go it their own way. That is freedom, and that is what God has given people, in the hope that most choose of their own free will to follow Him. But in letting them go, He also runs the risk that they, turn their back on Him and want nothing to do with Him. And I just don't care about this situation. I really don't, and I don't care particularly to read other people's opinions, because this is one of the things that I have been struggling with for the past 20 years, and I just don't read them. I'm not interested in people saying, "Oh, it's an absolute farce," and God will send them all to hell. And I'm not interested in hearing the Christian go, "Well, we should love them, but we should also tell them that we don't agree with what they're saying," etc., etc. I just am not interested anymore. I personally believe it's a very case by case thing when it comes down to whether it's right or not. And so long as I'm pursuing the course that I think God is okay for me to do, I don't care about anybody else in that situation. I wouldn't dream of judging. I would simply abstain from saying anything, because I know what it feels like to be a sufferer, and I also know what it feels like to be hated on by Christians about it, and also sort of pitted by Christians as well. The final issue is the thing about the Confederate flag. Do you know, I don't really think that the Confederate flag had anything to do with the massacre. A guy posing with it probably, obviously, doesn't even know what he's sort of posing with, let alone what he's actually doing, out of his head or whatever. My issue is, I am surprised that the Union, the Federal Union, allow it to be flied in the first place, because whichever way you look at it, whether you look at it from the perspective of the Union, which basically says that the Confederacy was a homegrown, a domestic terrorist situation, and that flag therefore symbolises that. Or whether you look at it also from a southern point of view, in which case they think it's about gaining their own independence, going their own way, and being proud of their flag. Either way, because they lost and are now part of the Federal Union once again, I am surprised that the Federal Union allows them to fly the flag in the first place. You would not necessarily be so lucky in England. In England, although it's not strictly enforced, you are not supposed to fly any other flag, any other nation's flag. That includes nations to which we're friendly with. Now, I think it's okay if you fly our flag above their flag. I think that's okay, but realistically speaking, we don't allow it at all. I am surprised that such an inflated central government allows it to be flown on soil that is, state soil anyway, despite the fact it is part of their past, and an important part as well. However, I think it's a little far to go to, send something to Washington National Cathedral and say that because this is now a symbol of hate, they ought to remove the stained glass windows, which are, high up in the cathedral wall, with tiny, maybe 1 centimetre squared, Confederate flags in, because isn't that awful? I would say, isn't it awful that a country founded on the principle of an unestablished church has a national cathedral, and in that national cathedral, rather than the symbology being, completely divine, it seems to also have a timeline of their own history. We don't even do that in this country. So, those Confederate flags on those windows probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. But as they are, let's not get stupid about it. And those are my thoughts, and I think I've just given a massive blog. So massive that if this is very, very extensive, I may not give the first part of the blog. I may just use this completely as my whole blog.